Yeah, yeah, yeah. Totally.
Right? Okay. Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Online Learning Council. We're starting our fall lineup here. Couldn't have a better speaker to launch us into this new academic year. Please come on in. It's sort of like church. The front, people don't like sitting in the front pew. So please come on in and join us. I want to say a special thanks to our team and to Patrick Jones for helping us put together our program for the year. You have the program on your chair for the year, so please make sure to mark your calendars and for our events, for the training sessions that are available for us this year. So you've got a year at a glance with the brochure. We can also send it out to you electronically if you want to share it with your faculty members. We have a lot of people who are joining us by Zoom today. It's the opportunity that we have using technology to ensure that our colleagues across the United States are able to join us. And for those individuals who just couldn't run between their teaching schedules and their work schedules to get here. But I want to make sure that the questions that are fed in today we'll have the opportunity to answer them. So Kristen and I have known each other for a number of years. We couldn't have a better speaker here today. She has such a unique perspective and long 20-year career in this higher ed environment, this technology-enhanced environment. Kristen is in the School of Education. She is in the Doctorate of Education, the EDD program, in the Leadership and Management program. Kristen has served in many different roles at different institutions. She's a voracious writer, researcher, and also speaker on these topics. Her new course that she developed around neuroscience has been very popular with people in this field, and I think will become even more popular as people really understand the neuroscience and cognitive issues around how students learn and how we teach them in new ways. So without further ado, you're really in for a treat. I'd love to introduce my colleague, Dr. Kristen Betts.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for coming today. What I'm going to do is we only have an hour, so you can go back if you want to read any more about my professional background. I have a slide here that'll tell you a bit more about my specific areas of research. I want to get started on our topic today because there is so much happening in education, and Drexel is truly leading some exciting research in this area. So we're going to start by looking at mind-brain education science. We're going to look at human learning principles. We're going to look at NeuroMyths, evidence-based practices, active learning, and there's going to be a strong focus on practice. So when you leave today, or for those of you online, when you go back to your offices or to wherever you're going to be going in terms of your courses, I want you to really be thinking about practice. We're going to look at transfer of learning, and that's within the classroom, across your program, across curricula, and then real-world transfer as well. You will be engaged today in a number of activities. We've got the presentation. There'll be a short self-assessment. I've got one group work assignment. You've got a take-home quiz, and then you have homework. So I want to make sure that you're actually able to apply what you're learning today. So we're going to start with mind-brain education science. And if this isn't something you're familiar with, I strongly encourage you as educators to read as much as you can. It is such an exciting area because it brings together neuroscience, psychology, education, and truly the focus is on looking at learning, but through human learning principles. How should we be teaching our students, especially in light of today's diverse learners and what is happening in our institutions of higher education as well as with technology? So here's a brief timeline. I won't spend much time going over it, but mind-brain education actually goes back to 1981. James Odell at University of Kansas wrote the very first dissertation on mind-brain education, and he actually looked at brain-compatible learning strategies. Kurt Fisher, who's at Harvard, he is prominent in this area, spent most of the 90s developing the foundation for this. And then in the 2000s, up into where we are today, there's been just prolific growth. There's a researcher named Tracy Tokuhama Espinosa. She's in Quito, Ecuador. She teaches with Harvard. She's done a lot of research in grounded theory, and she has spent extensive time doing meta-analyses and coming up with some of the foundational work that we'll talk about today in mind-brain education. So I want to start off with a short assessment. So if you happen to have a piece of paper in front of you, for those of you online who are at your desk, please just write down C for correct, I for incorrect, or DK for don't know. If you don't have a piece of paper, that's okay. We're going to be going over the answers momentarily. But just go through and look at these statements. And I just want you, there's only 5, to write down correct, incorrect, or don't know. We'll go over them in just a minute. Now, for some of you, particularly if you're educators, you probably recognize some of these general assertions. And what I want to share is that all of them are incorrect. And I say this because these are things that permeate throughout education. So you probably have heard of the Mozart Effect, and I will admit to buying the Mozart albums. I have 2 children that grew up listening to it. I will say academically they've done well, but I can't substantiate that with research. This concept of being left brain, right brain, we know that various functions are associated with the different hemispheres, but there is no research showing that you're right brain or left brain, and that's the last thing we want to teach students. So we want to talk about using your entire brain. Individuals learn better when they receive information in their preferred learning style. So yes, individuals have a learning preference, but there are no learning styles, and we don't want to be teaching the learning styles because then we're not teaching students to really optimize critical thinking and that critical lens. We only use 10% of our brain. Again, a big misnomer. We use 100% of our brain throughout the day. And then lastly, there are critical periods in human development where things can be learned and then not learned. You're going to hear from a prominent researcher in a short video clip. The exciting thing is that we are all lifelong learners. So where do they come from? Well, these are called NeuroMyths. And I'm an educator. I started off in K through 12 education, and I remember the first time I took these, I will go through and let you know that I found some of them I thought were correct because of what I had been taught. So we need to figure out how to take neuromyths out of our professional development and how to dispel this. Why? Because educators' conceptualization of knowledge, how they understand teaching, impacts their pedagogy, and it also affects their learners' epistemological beliefs. So what you know will influence how you teach. And so we need to make sure we start with dispelling neuromyths. And that's what Tracy Tokuhama does in almost all of her research. So I'm going to share throughout this presentation 4 studies that I've been fortunate enough to be involved in over the last year at Drexel University. And I'm going to share some of the findings. So the first is an international study looking at neuromyths and evidence-based practices. So about 4 years ago, I decided I would go back to school. I went to Johns Hopkins University and did a graduate program in mind-brain teaching. It was fabulous. What I found most interesting is we studied neuromyths and the high prevalence of neuromyths in K through 12 education with teachers. So I decided we would do a research study at Drexel. And so what we did was we actually put together a group a year ago, and we started looking at all of the studies that have been conducted between 2002 and 2017. It doesn't matter which country you go to, there is a high level of prevalence of neuromyths, K through 12 teachers and pre-service teachers. So we decided we would want to pull together a group and find out, is this true in higher education? So is it the same? Maybe there's a high prevalence because in higher education, we're actually fostering these NeuroMyths, or we may not be debunking them if they are in fact not true. So we worked with the Online Learning Consortium. We have 7 other universities. We've got 1 in South America, 1 in Europe. And what we did was the questionnaire or the survey that typically goes out to K through 12 is 32 questions. We went through and we had to narrow ours down to 23 because we wanted to have that comparison. But higher education has a different student than K through 12. So we removed some of the questions, modified some of them, and then we actually added 28 questions looking at evidence-based practices. So it's one thing to look at NeuroMyths, but we wanted to find out in higher education, what do higher educators actually know about evidence-based practices? And we wanted to look at predictors. What are predictors for susceptibility of NeuroMyths and awareness? So we looked at not just instructors, but anybody who touches a course. That would be an instructor, an instructional designer, professional development administrators who actually are fostering professional development. I say this because I've gone to sessions before where we've studied learning styles. So I may have come in not believing learning styles, but after 60 minutes, I might walk away saying, this is great. I'm going to use learning styles. So we have to look at all components. We also looked at, we wanted to find out, is there a difference between on-campus, blended, and online in terms of NeuroMyths and evidence-based practices? 4-year institutions, 2-year, the United States, internationally. We ended up having 1,038 participants, 48 states across the United States and 46 countries. The study will be published this fall. I encourage you to look at it. You can look at all of the questions. And this is what we found. So this is, just a little preliminary set of the results. So on the right-hand side, this is the percentage correct. So did you get them correct? So when we look at the instructors, 16% got this one correct. Now, it doesn't mean they got them incorrect, but they may have said, I don't know. Well, we need to make sure if we're all teaching and we're all touching courses and we're involved in design and instruction, that we're all aware of these NeuroMyths. Because again, if it's going to inform our pedagogy and knowledge, it's important that we're aware. As you see, it gets stronger. There are critical periods. We're at 71%. If I were grading this, it would be a C. But as you go through and see the 23 questions, I think you'll be surprised at what are NeuroMyths and what we may assume to actually be true. There's actually research that's been done out there. There are so many people that especially were frustrated with this learning styles that they came out, 5 individuals with 5 companies, and said, if you can come out with any research to prove learning styles exist, we'll give you $5,000. To date, they haven't had anybody. So for homework, you can actually, at the very end, I have slides for homework. I've got links for everything. I want you to go to page 30, and you can read about some of the NeuroMyths. The book on the right by Dr. Tracy Tokuhama Espinosa just came out last month, and it addresses absolutely every NeuroMyth. It is the easiest book to read, and I think you'll find very informational. So going on, this is where I see myself as a learner, especially when you look at neuroscience, psychology, and education. Alan Toffler, I think the most prominent thing is we need to look at learning, unlearning, and relearning because we can change the brain, but we have to be engaged in learning and actively engaged. So we're going to focus on mind-brain education science, and I'm going to start with 6 principles of human learning, and this will be our foundation. So we've dispelled at least 5 myths. I know there are more out there, but we're going to start with that foundation. So we're going to begin looking at human learning principles. Now, where do they come from? Well, Dr. Tokuhama Espinosa spent 2016, 2017 looking at 4,500 documents, doing a Delphi study that had 40 experts from neuroscience, psychology, education, 11 countries come together, and they all agreed this is what educators need to have as a foundation in terms of understanding the brain. So the first 2, human brains are as unique as human faces. And then the second, each individual's brain is differently prepared to learn different tasks. So when students come into your classroom, we need to consider, even though if you're teaching undergraduate, they've all finished high school, each high school, even within a school district, is going to be different. The upbringing that they had, did they travel internationally? Did they travel out of the state? Socioeconomic status will affect that. Some of the research we did at Johns Hopkins, when you're looking at brain imaging and looking at the amygdala of children who grow up in high poverty, where there's chronic stress, it changes the brain. So each student in our class is truly unique. In fact, what you'll find is there's something called neurodiversity. We often talk about diversity, but it's typically visible diversity. We need to look at neurodiversity. There's also invisible disabilities. I encourage you all to look up online as well. But neurodiversity is something that we need to really foster in our classrooms. Yale University had a study that came out in 2015, and you can actually read this for homework. It's a short little article, but they have said you can actually identify an individual, even within a huge conference room setting, by brain imaging and their brain activity. So we are truly, truly unique. And what's exciting is we can change our brains physically, and we're going to look at this. So the next two principles, the brain changes constantly with experience. And I want you to hone in on the word experience. So when you're teaching your courses, I don't want people to simply think we're teaching. We are engaging our students in educational experiences that we are developing. We want them not to simply understand, we want them to connect that to prior learning, and we want them, from a metacognitive perspective, to find ways that they can transfer it. One of the most exciting things about being at Drexel University is our commitment to civic engagement. You'll hear President Fry talk about all the time to be the most civically engaged university in the United States. This is how we change brains. The next, neuroplasticity exists throughout the lifespan. When you leave today, neuroplasticity should be a word that you should embrace. It is the most exciting thing about being an educator. So James Zoll has been a prolific writer in this area, but chances are you probably haven't read his work. So we talked about mind-brain education really starting to flourish in the early 2000s. You'll see a book that he published in 2002, The Art of Changing the Brain. There's Norman Doidge from Canada, a book in 2007. Another book by Zoll in 2011. And Dr. Tokuhama Espinosa has a book coming out in 2019 where she brings this all together. I am an educator. I will tell you, I have lots of bookshelves in my home. No matter where I've moved, my books go with me. These are not books that I typically had on my shelf until I got involved in mind-brain education. So I encourage you to look at this. Dr. Laura Boyd is going to share some information. She's with University of British Columbia, and I want you to hear what she has to say about neuroplasticity. For homework, you're going to watch the entire video. For this, we're just going to watch a clip.
It's an amazing time to be a brain researcher, and I would argue to you that I have the most interesting job in the world. We know about the brain. We know what the brain is changing at a breath pace. And what we understood about the brain is not true. Now, some of the misconceptions are obvious to others. For example, we used to think that after childhood, the brain could not change. And it turns out that nothing is farther from the truth.
Another misconception about the brain.
Misconception about the brain is that you only part of it at a time.
This is also untrue.
Untrue.
When you're
It's out that when you're at rest,
your brain is highly active.
your brain is highly active.
Advances in technology.
Advances in technology allowed us to make these and important discoveries. And perhaps the most exciting, the most interesting and training these discoveries that every time you learn a new feature or skill, change.
Something we call neuroplasticity.
It's something called neuroplasticity.
As little as 5 years ago,
we thought that after about puberty, the only condition that is number negative, loss of brain cells with aging, resulted in damage, like stroke. And then studies began to show remarkable amounts of organisms in the brain.
And doing research has shown us that all of behaviors change the brain. That these changes are limited by age, experience, and they're taking place all the time. And very importantly, brain organization helps to support recovery after damage. The key to each of these changes is plasticity.
So her presentation is, after this presentation, your brain will not be the same. When students come into your classroom and they leave, their brain will not be the same. What an exciting position to be, where students come in and you can truly be a part of their journey in education and their career. So there's a book called NeuroTeach. If you have not read it, I encourage you to, especially if you are teaching courses, developing courses, because it brings together everything from the neurosciences, psychology, and education. The very first statement in their book is, teachers are brain changers. And I would say, I would replace it, and again, say educators are brain changers. If you are developing courses, you are changing the brain because you are creating experiences for those students. If you're teaching professional development, you're changing the brains of those who are designing courses and teaching courses. So we're all engaged in this exciting process. So the last two principles, new learning is influenced by prior experiences. And this could not be more true in higher education, especially with adult learners. And this is what makes education even more dynamic in higher ed. And I'm going to provide you with examples in just a little while, what you can do in your classrooms to truly engage students. Remember, if they're not actively engaged, they're not going to be changing their brain. We need to have them engaged. Second, there is no new learning without some form of attention and some form of memory. I want you to focus in on the word attention because this is critical. If your students aren't paying attention, chances are they're in default mode and they're thinking about the past. They're thinking about the future. They're thinking about what they're going to do after class. We need to find ways to make that connection throughout the course, and we can do that through active learning. So we need to look at prior learning and how do we build upon prior learning. If you look at Yale University, they have prolific research coming out, and you'll see a number of studies that I share. There's a wonderful article that looks at interactions between attention and memory. And they state attention and memory cannot operate without each other. And lastly, memory from past experiences guide what should be attended. So this is where the concept of scaffolding is so important. Curriculum scaffolding is so important. Knowing what your peers are teaching in the course prior to the students coming into your course so you can extend that learning. So as educators, it's great. You go in and you've got rose-colored glasses. You're teaching your courses, your evaluations are strong. But the reality is, with what is coming out with science and all of this research, we can actually go out there with new glasses, looking through the lens of mind-brain education. And I encourage everybody, as you watch this presentation with these new glasses or leave the session today, look for these MBE connections. So this is group work. You're going to have just 2 minutes. You can work with the person next to you. And I have questions. For those of you online, you can simply type in the text area or the chat area your responses. So I've got 5 questions. Again, correct, incorrect, or don't know. Don't be shy. Talk to the person next to you. And I'm just going to give you 2 minutes to go through this, and you're going to answer whether it's correct, incorrect, or don't know. How are you? Hey, it's nice to see you. Thank you.
I had to take a step out of I had to call it triceps section. So the people who are the most it would be a combination of technology, which are so we have speech recognition technologists. Rachel Razor you would think there would be more knowledge about if your voice does this.
Thank you for telling me. My goodness. Stand ready for you.
Doctors actually look at it. Because if doctors share enough data, then we can get
Oh, that's fantastic. Susan.
Okay, so I'm going to actually go over the answers. So start wrapping up your responses. We're going to be going over the answers. Now keep in mind, we have 29 of these that we developed through this group that went out internationally with this study, and I can't wait to share it. I will let you know the School of Education is going to place both assessments on one of the web pages, so you'll be able to go and take the NeuroMyths assessment and evidence-based practice assessment. So we're going to look at these. The first three are incorrect, and the last two are correct. So I will say, as a lifelong learner, I go everywhere with highlighters. I do read. I love rereading. However, what you're going to find through research, and this is research that's happening in these different neurolabs, and I'm going to share some of the research today. Even Lori Severino, who works in the School of Education, we'll talk about one of her studies, has students in elementary school who are going in and they're testing questions using an FNIR device to look at oxygenation and whether or not the question should be included in assessment. Is it a strong enough question, or is it too easy based on what they're seeing with brain imaging? So when we look at evidence-based practices, there's research to support this. So rereading course materials is not necessarily effective. It doesn't mean it's not effective, but there are other strategies that will be more effective. Human memory works like a digital recording device. If you are interested, and I didn't post it here because of time limitations, Dr. Holt, who works with CNHP, we teach in a certificate program that looks at neuroscience, online learning, and we have a guest speaker who's coming in October, and his research actually focuses on memory. So if you're interested in attending that, let us know. It's going to be hosted via Zoom. He's from Canada. But as much as we would like to think, you watch something, you're recording everything, research shows every time you recall a memory, you're actually changing that memory. And so if you look at what's happening in cognitive psychology, it's unbelievable. And this is why we need to bring together these areas. Frequent low-stakes tests do not enhance learning. They do. And what you'll find is when they say low stakes, it could be assessments that have low point value, but it's through the practice of retrieval that students build really the neural pathways that help something become procedural learning. It also helps decrease anxiety. Keep in mind that we have a large percentage of our students coming to higher education who are self-identifying with anxiety, high stress. Another thing, there's a study that came out, last year where they looked at high school students, and during the height of the most stressful period during the academic year, they did cortisol testing with saliva samples. And what they found was during that time period, all of the cortisol levels increased. But for a good percentage of those students, it didn't decrease after the stress dissipated. They continued. So when we talk about quizzes, if you're a faculty member and you have 2 quizzes and a final test, where is the practice that helps that student with that rehearsal? What helps them prepare? So we can easily take low-stakes assessments and create 10 question assessments every week. They can take it as many times as they want. And you say 5% of your grade, you have to get 100% or 90%, whatever it may be. But it gives them practice with going through and rehearsal. Learning should be spaced over time. Yes, mass instruction does not necessarily work because of cognitive overload. There is too much. The brain cannot take in that much information, so it should be spaced, and we'll talk about this. Repeated practice and rehearsal of learned material or a skill will help to consolidate. Yes, the more you practice, and when you talk about, if you heard me speak in the spring, I talked about constructivism and social constructivism. You have to deconstruct what you're learning and reconstruct it with personal meaning to make it relevant, and this will help with the consolidation of long-term memory. So, what did we find out from those that we surveyed? Well, looking here on the right-hand side, the percentage of correct responses. Again, you're going to see it increasing as we go to the lower questions. But again, we had 28 questions, and they may be of interest to you since all of you are involved in education. So, going on and looking at this next slide, how engaged are your students in active learning? And this is important. Not simply reading or watching videos. How often are they deconstructing and reconstructing the materials in your class? Formative assessment. How are they engaged? There should be multiple forms of formative assessment in classes to keep them engaged. Summative assessment, the scaffolding, the formative assessment should lead to that summative assessment. And what's most important is feedback. You learn through feedback. Your body is amazing. If I touch something hot, through sensory learning, I know I'm getting feedback. Individuals thrive on feedback. Students need to know what they're doing well in areas they need to develop. So with feedback, is it instructor given? Is it technology given? When I hear faculty say, I've got so much work already, I know, I'm teaching classes as well, but what can you use technology for? If you're the individual that has the quizzes, these practice assessments are great. I know Dr. Holt and I teach a course in neuroscience of learning. One of the issues when we first started teaching was students weren't grasping some of the materials in the textbooks. So we created 10-question self-assessments every week to highlight the critical information that they needed to know, and then we brought it together in the self-assessments or the quizzes. We want students to learn to fail. Research is failing. I can't tell you how many times I had a hypothesis where it did not come out the way I thought the research would. That's learning. So we need to help students fail mindfully. We need them to be able to reflect on their work from a metacognitive perspective and understand what they've gotten correct and where they need to actually look as critical thinkers for that next approach. So metacognition, if this is something you don't talk to your students about, I strongly encourage you do. Every orientation we host with our students, it's the very first thing I talk about. You need to be engaged in this course, and we need to talk about metacognition, how you are thinking about your own thinking. We need to think about how you're going to apply what you're learning across multiple real-world contexts. Vanderbilt, again, has wonderful research here. Metacognitive practices, and you'll see the word practices, help students become aware of their strengths and weaknesses. So I'm hoping you're starting to see patterns in the research, awareness. As we go through and we look, this is another homework assignment. Eckhart Tolle says, awareness is the greatest agent for change. And unless students are aware of what they know and what they don't know, they're not going to change. I tell our doctoral and master's students, if you're not struggling, you're not learning. Learning causes you to almost face a dilemma. If you look at any research by Jack Mesereau on transformative learning, you've got cognitive conflict. That's why you go to college. That's why you do a master's or a doctoral degree. Cognitive conflict is what changes your brain and allows you to see other perspectives, social constructivism. So when we look at practice, it's like a path in a forest. The only way you can create a path is to continuously walk down that path multiple times. When we look at the brain, this is your brain. This is what's occurring in your brain right now. These are neural pathways. each time you learn something, it's reinforced, myelination happens, and that pathway gets stronger and stronger. When you have the synapses, this is where learning occurs. So you've got the saying, neurons that fire together, wire together. You need to practice. This is why prior learning is so important, because you can access these prior pathways and reinforce them. So for students, we need to think about positive and negative transfer. When they come into our classrooms, I'm not sure if you've ever had a student tell you, I've always gotten A's. This is impossible. I've never had less than an A. Well, there's stuff that they're probably transferring from a positive framework, but there's also negative transfer. And I tell my students in that orientation, unfortunately, many students will have mastery, but mastery of mistakes. So I have students that come in saying, I've always done APA this way. Well, somebody hasn't caught them with APA then, or they're not using 6th edition. So they have to unlearn, relearn, and then apply. And so we need to help our students understand this is part of the learning process. So there is negative transfer, but there's also mastery, and we have to look towards what our stated outcomes are. So I want you not to think about muscle memory. You hear this all the time, muscle memory. The reality is we have to get our students thinking about axons and myelination. How do you get them involved in the learning process? There is an unbelievable video by NPR, and if this is something completely new, watch this video. The article is fabulous. If you're in this area, watch it because you may want to share with your colleagues as well. But it talks about these pathways and how we help our students reinforce learning. And for me, this goes back to the constructivist and social constructivist approach. Knowledge can't be taught. It doesn't matter how much you stand in front of your class. It has to be created in the mind of that student. They have to be aware, they have to connect to it, and they have to personalize it in order to make this happen. So there's a paradigm shift. This is probably the most exciting thing for me as an educator. Most of my career has been in online learning. I started in online learning in the mid-1990s. My dissertation focused on the recruitment and retention of faculty in online learning, way back then, distance education. I took a course at Harvard this spring, and Dr. Tokuhama Espinosa was my faculty member, and I turned in my paper, and it looked at online learning. And the paper came back. It did not have the grade I had hoped it would have, but this is part of learning, unlearning, and relearning. And she says, why is your paper focused on online learning? I said, well, that's my area of expertise. That's where I work. That's what I do. And she says, I know, but what you're writing about is learning. And I said, oh, I know, but I work online. And it was a Jack Mesereau moment. It was that dilemma. She challenged me, and I said, I'm really confused. I need a Zoom meeting. I need to see you. I need to talk with you. So one of my students, so I met with her immediately, and I said, I'm still confused. Cognitive conflict. I said, you've got to explain, what am I not seeing? Complete functional fixedness, the Einstein effect. I had seen it so many ways as a hammer that I was creating big hammers, small hammers, medium-sized hammers, not realizing I needed other tools. And I ended the quarter, the semester, with a complete transformation in terms of my own understanding of online. My space is learning online. While I thought it was online learning, the reality is education has changed. If you were teaching on campus, you're involved in learning online. You may not be an online instructor. The minute you send your students online, to the internet, to the cloud, they are learning online, and that is the space. It's the space I've been teaching and working in, and she kept telling me, you're not defining it the way you need to, and she helped me redefine it. So I hope we're all gonna be able to leave with the glasses that I shared with you, because this is where I started in the 1990s. This is where distance education was. Sure, I'll try a distance education course, and you had students going, what, there's nothing available? Okay, I'll sign up. However, the challenge was a reality. There was not a lot of engagement. So you were pretty much isolated, even with just a listserv. So what you found was people complained, they're like, wow, no wonder, I mean, very high attrition rates. You went out there, you didn't know if people were actually still in your course a couple of weeks in. So in 2001 to 2010, there was a shift. All of a sudden, universities said, wow, we like this online learning. In 2001, the No Significant Difference report came out. And universities are like, this is great. Evidence-based practices, there's no significant difference between teaching online and on campus. The outcomes are the same. So all of a sudden, they started finding faculty to teach. Faculty are saying, me, I've never taught online. Students being told, oh, your courses are filled, you'll have to take it online. The challenge was there was no training, not a lot of support. For everybody. But then we moved into this era of 2011 to 2007, this explosion of social media. Everything is done online. In fact, what's so interesting, you see this, I mean, infants, I would say not even crawling, and they're using iPads. There are kids with Mickey Mouse watches more advanced than my iPhone. You've got students. I have a daughter who said, my friend never goes to the grocery store. She just does it online. So our students are different. So when we come up and we teach using PowerPoint, I love lecture. I hope it never goes away. The Socratic method is great, but we need to integrate technology so there's that connection. So when we look at what's happened, everything's come together. So when we talk about learning online, we actually all share something in common now. So everybody, you might teach hybrid, you might teach face-to-face, you might teach online, but we all at some point teach in that space where we're learning online, or our students are. So we need to think about the brain. How do all of us create these neural pathways regardless of the modality? So when we leave, everybody is just as successful. So I've created a proposed definition, and out there you'll see pedagogy. And I put out there, it's kind of a living definition. If we look at online neuropedagogy, building upon neuroscience, psychology, education, concepts of neuroplasticity and neurodiversity, facilitating educational online experiences, and that could be face-to-face, but an online experience through teaching, active learning, and assessment across educational formats, all of them, to support comprehension, application, and transfer of knowledge and learning. I believe this is where education is going, and this is what we're doing at Drexel. So we need to have a new mindset. So I want you to go through it. I'm going to share examples of what we're doing in our classes. So spatial visualization. I attended a study, and they were talking about Dr. Cheryl Sorby. She's at Ohio State University, and they were sharing that females test very low in spatial visualization. I was curious about this. I love curriculum. I love designing courses and looking at student success. So we decided that we would look into this. So the School of Ed reached out to biomedical engineering. We reached out to the College of Media Arts and Design and College of Nursing and Health Professions, and we put together a study. And last fall, we surveyed all incoming biomedical engineering students. And we looked at cognitive and non-cognitive factors linked to student success. We looked at mindset, grit, creativity, imposter phenomena, perspectives in engineering, but they also took the Purdue Spatial Visualization Assessment. And Dr. Sorby, who is renowned, has research that shows nationally females test at almost half the rate as males do on this assessment. Now, this is actually what the test looks like. I mean, we put this online and had students take it. So there is a better version. One university put it online. It's kind of 2D. However, this is what you're given. And unfortunately, it's been shown to be a predictor. If you don't test well, chances are you may not stay in engineering. You may not do well. So we decided we were going to look at our students. And what did we find? Females tested much lower than males. So the question was, how could we create an intervention? But looking at mind-brain education, looking at practice. So Nick Gestation, if you haven't worked with him before, actually helped us create something in immersive virtual reality. We took the test and made the test something you could do online. We made similar shapes, because one of the issues is spatial visualization is not taught within the curriculum in K through 12 or in higher ed. So we used immersive virtual reality, spatial visualization, and this is me, and we set it up with FNIR imaging. And we had an intervention with 11 students. One that had high scores in spatial visualizations and one that had lower scores. We had males and females, international and national students. And we looked at practice. So we wanted to make sure, could we create something where students could practice across all formats? Feedback, this is technology given. Nothing is better than timely feedback. I am telling you, it's like perfection. If you put it in and it doesn't work, it spits it right back out. I did not do well at this. The first assessment, they're like, students finish in about 30 seconds. 2 minutes later, I was still saying, I'm just getting familiar with my surroundings. So this would have been great for me had I decided to go into this field. But I want to show you what it looks like. So you've got on the headset, which is very affordable now, and you pick up the pieces, but you can actually, it's like taking it off the test. You can look at it, and you'll see that one did not work. It drops back to the bottom. But once you find this piece, and you'll see what Nick did, which was so creative, is when it's one-dimensional, it's hard to understand how the shapes fit together. So he put in the different lines to help students learn how to do this. We had 3 levels. First was easy, then it mixes them up, it changes them. Some of them you have more pieces than enough spaces. And we're actually pulling all that data together right now. But we're going to follow this because we want to find out, are students who test lower on creativity and high on imposter phenomena? Are they also testing lower in spatial visualization? What is a predictor of student success? If we can increase mastery with spatial visualization, does that help with mindset? Does it help with grit? Does it decrease imposter phenomena? So when we look at transfer of learning, I'm going to show you some things we're doing in our classes and then another study. So in 802 and 815, these are 2 courses. I've collected 4 years of research based on the integration of mind-brain education. So in 802, these are typical courses, discussion boards, we had blogs, a case study, professional needs assessment, and then a final project. In 815, discussion boards, annotated bibliography, poster presentations, and then a paper. The challenge was the discussion boards, you did not want to wait till Saturday because then you had to do them all at once, and they were not really exciting discussion boards, and they didn't get students to practice the content that they wanted. So the challenge was we had limited writing, the discussion boards were read, post, reply, and we had limited differentiation. So we changed it. In week 1, we had one-on-one sessions using Zoom with our students. We had an online orientation where we talked about metacognition. We talked about transfer of learning. We talked about choosing a real-world topic that affected where they currently are or where they plan to go. The discussion boards we changed. Our concept was different. When you're in an on-campus classroom, you can walk around and look at students' work. You can see what they're writing. You can sit next to students and tell them what they need to do. You don't have that online. But if you create your discussion boards well, you can. That's the purpose of discussion board, going around and giving students feedback. The paper, the large paper where students all of a sudden would say, there's no way, I'm an A student. How can I get a B on a paper? Or for a student that got a C on a paper, and that affected whether or not they would go on, they had no feedback prior to that was really in a paper format. So we broke that down into 3 papers, and we got them thinking in terms of metacognition and transfer. We got them involved in reflection. So I'm going to show you what we did. One thing to think about, not all students in an on-campus course participate. But if you have that online space, you can use a learning management system to get everybody to participate. Nothing is more frustrating to me than a classroom of 30 students and only 10 raise their hands. So the other 20, what happens with them? You can use the online discussion forum to engage everyone. So what we did was we changed everything, one assignment at a time. The discussion boards turned to transfer within the assignments. We scaffolded the papers for real-world transfer, the projects, real-world transfer, and we focused on feedback. So one of the discussion boards, which was, for this week, track how you use technology within a 24-hour period and write up a text summation. We still had them write just 100 words about how they use technology, but they had to create either an infographic or word cloud using what they collected. It's a technology class. They have to use applications. So this was an assignment that went towards their final project. They had to come up with concept maps. So they learned about learning theorists. And instead of simply writing a paper about learning theorists, they had to write learning theories that were relative to the work that they did. If they're in education, professional development administrators, and they had to explain it and show these connections. So it went from a very long text post to be something that they created. Still a short 100-word introduction, but they created this. So this is the same assignment. They just chose a different application. So looking at differentiation. Students also, because all of them are posted, you can do this on campus, learn from one another. A flip book. All of their work, every application they use went towards their flip book. They ended up with an electronic flip book that has a short resume, their bio, sample work. It goes into a final online bookshelf, but they get to see what others are doing and learn from peers. It became part of our discussion boards. You got to review your students' or your peers' flip book and provide feedback. In the writing class, one of the biggest issues is how do you break down writing in terms of research streams? This is really hard for our students. We used to have them do outlines, and I would have students saying, Dr. Betts, can you give me an example of an outline? Well, I would give them examples, and they still would write down questions. Does this call, not an outline, you're writing questions down. So we turned it into a concept map, writing around or walking around the classroom. So we would say, create a concept map. It's due by Sunday, but you need to post by Thursday. Post what your concept map looks like and share it with your peers. I could go in and give feedback, and people could fail mindfully, where I would say, your concept map looks really good. Let's change those questions to shorter statements so they become more research focused. And they would go back and you could see this evolution. In this writing course, they have to do annotations. So the very first discussion board after the introduction is, post 2 annotations. You have to save your peers. If you want everybody to get 100 on this discussion board, post your annotations and find errors in your peers. Help them create the perfect annotation, and you can actually use those annotations in your first assignment. Boy, they go in, they find stuff that I don't even find sometimes, you know? And so again, using the discussion boards to foster that learning. So the writing paper, one of the challenges is taking a 20-page paper and breaking it down. Students all of a sudden have that writer's block. Where do I start? We have them create Padlet, and we say, just start small. Start in your writing groups. Post it. We'll give you feedback. So they come up with their abstract, the significance of research, and they get feedback over a 2-week period, and then we tell them, put it into your first paper. They get feedback again, but again, it allows for that failing mindfully if they're off track. And I will say it saves me from grading a 20-page paper that is not ready for grading, because my goal is learning. If students have entered my classroom, it's because cognitively they've met all the criteria and they should be there, but they may have deficits just like spatial visualization that they're not aware that they have. So going through, we have reflections. I tell them in weeks 1 through 5, I want you to go back and look at our course outcomes. I want you to look at the objectives, and I want you to reflect and share with me what your biggest takeaways are and what you've been able to apply. They can use any application they want. Some of them use text, but it's a wonderful way because I want them to be cognitively aware of what they're doing in our classroom. For feedback, we have rubrics. I give the very first one, especially if it's a large writing course, I give video feedback because I want students to hear the intonations, especially for students who are not used to not getting an A. Most of the papers, and I have probably half my papers, I don't even put a grade on. I give them voice feedback or video feedback and say, I need you to revise this paper because I need it to align with the rubric. I have voice feedback that I provide, text feedback, and I'm going to show just one example of how this works. Oh, let me see. Well, it's not as loud as I would like, but you can see me on the video, and you'll see the comments, and I talk and I walk the student through. This is something called Screencast-O-Matic. It's only $15. You can record, and it gives you a little HTML link, and I have everything that's password protected, so I send it to my students and say, here you go. Some of the students, it's as easy as doing simply a 30-second set of comments. So the last study, the School of Education, one of the issues that we have is melt. We have students that leave before they get started, but we're Drexel. We start accepting students in January. They don't start until September. We have some students who suddenly get hold of the syllabus and say, oh my gosh, I've not been online. What am I going to do? So we know in looking at this, well, going back, we look at grit, mindset, imposter phenomena, creativity, but our focus is looking at learning strategies. Why? Because the School of Education, we're looking at becoming a renowned intellectual center of pedagogical innovation. And for that, we surveyed all of our incoming students in the fall. 74% said it was their first time online. Almost all of them are online students. That could be a problem. 49% said they're novices or beginners, have never used APA. Well, that's a problem. They're going to be writing papers starting that first week. 29% hadn't used it in 5 to 10 years. Negative transfer. I am sure they are using 5th or 4th edition. 44% said the last time they were in school was 5 to 15 years ago, which has created a lot of anxiety for writing. So what we did was we actually created an APA course. Any student at Drexel is welcome to enroll in it, but we created it for students who aren't at Drexel yet. So the minute you get accepted to our program, you get a wonderful email saying, congratulations on becoming a Drexel Dragon. You have so many months, you have so much time before your programs. Enroll in our APA Open Access course so you can refresh or learn APA. So why? Practice. We want them to practice, but more importantly, we want them to practice being in Blackboard. Because if they don't practice those skills, they will not be successful because that's additional stress. Feedback, everything's set up so the quizzes are electronic, all the activities are set up so they're electronic. Transfer, they transfer to their courses. So I will tell you, they get beautiful badges once they complete each module. It's early awareness, again, identifying deficits. We started it in May. We had faculty who were a bit trepidatious and said, I'm not sure any current students will sign up. It sounds like a lot of work. We have 255 students who signed up. We had over 100 in the first week. We have 35 newly matriculated students, and they go through a regular, what looks like a Blackboard course. We have students completing, and we're actually going to send out this survey this fall, and one of the new questions, did you complete the APA Open Access course? We have another course we're developing on leadership, professional development, and mindfulness that students can take before they come because we want them to be prepared for success. Lastly, your practice. When you leave today, I want you to think about how you're practicing what you're learning. Because what's so exciting is we're all changing our brains. We all have this opportunity to transfer what we're learning. So find out what they're doing at the Conquer Lab. It is so exciting in biomedical engineering. School of Education, I mentioned, is doing research in the city, looking at questions using FNIR imaging. We're working with Don McEachran, Kurtulus Izitoglu, Trisha Vokas, a whole slew of other doctoral students looking at spatial visualization and digestion. Look at the Center for Neurobusiness at LeBeau. Dr. John Kunios, if you haven't read this, looks at the Eureka Factor. When we talked about these neural pathways, he can actually show the point of creativity when you have that aha moment, and they've got brain imaging. These are people that we have here. Elizabeth von Boxdale, I apologize, von Boxdale, has a background in neuroscience. She is offered to come and speak to programs in schools about her research. So I invite you, if you look at Drexel Library, Drexel University Online, you can go and borrow any of these applications. It's online. We actually had the iPad. It was set up like a robot. We've got Kubies, where we brought Dr. Holton from Alaska and took her to a conference. She got to meet students. She got to present with me. So there is so much that is out there. You've got Virtually Inspired, which is an incredible website that brings together technology and education from around the world, things that you can augment your on-campus blended or online classroom with. There's a wonderful white paper that was written about this as well. You've got a take-home quiz. You're not going to take it now, but go back, review the materials, do your homework, and then take the quiz. And I invite you, as our report comes out, to actually go through the assessment again. Homework, I've got the slides, I've got links. I invite you to go back, read, share them with colleagues, resources again that I think you'll enjoy. And I just want to leave you with the fact that educators are brain changers. You're going to leave here and you are changing brains. I can't think of a better profession or a better place to be than Drexel University. So on that note, I'm going to wrap up. I don't know if you have any questions, but I want to thank all of you so much for coming.
So as we do Q&A, we have a microphone so that the people who are online can hear the questions asked, and they won't need to be repeated, but it won't amplify the sound in the room here. But I'll come around to you.
Thank you for.
No, it's on.
Okay, thank you for a wonderful presentation. So some takeaway thoughts I had were you mentioned Vanderbilt, and one of the national experts in misdiagnosis of non-white children, how they could be gifted but not acknowledge their giftedness. It reminded me of a study of classical music where they were wondering why there's no female classical music section chairs. And then they changed it so people were blindfolded. They just heard the person play and they selected it just on their play. And all of a sudden, all these women just showed up as getting employed as leadership positions. So if you can use online learning as a way for children to be identified, because Dr. Donna Ford at Vanderbilt, she goes into places where 10% of the children are white, but 100% of the gifted program, or 99% of the program, is white, which is statistically impossible. So I hope that you can do research on that, because I think this area, Temple, Drexel, and Penn, have ignored gifted for a long time relative to Arkansas. Yeah. If you want to get an online degree in gifted, you can do it in Arkansas. That is the worldwide place for gifted education, is Arkansas, I found out.
Well, first of all, thank you. Those are wonderful comments. And I will say, you should connect with Dr. Connie Little, Dr. Janet Sloan, because we have wonderful certificates that work with our master's degree programs, and that would be a great area to discuss, because you're right, this online realm is so important. And a lot of our students in our doctoral program and even our certificate in neuroscience, we have students who are creating open access online course areas to help parents learn about post-traumatic stress, because students are also getting misdiagnosed as having disabilities when it may be something else. So I think your comments are wonderful. I'd love to connect with you after to put you in contact with some of our colleagues. Thank you.
Questions?
Questions, comments?
Again, this
anything you want to share with me,
for
please?
people online.
So I agree that classical music does not help with reasoning, but there are studies that show that it helps with focus. So if you're playing it while you're studying, it helps with focus, but maybe not with reasoning. Do you have any information on that?
You know, I would suggest that you read the materials by Tracy Tokuhama Espinosa, and there's other articles online. I will tell you, there's like huge debate in some of these areas. In the brain, what is most exciting is when I was taking this course at Harvard, we had a wonderful woman who was a neuroscientist, and she was so prolific in her research and what she shared. And what stood out most to me was when I asked many of my questions, she would finally say, Kristen, some of this we just don't know. It's the brain. We're still discovering. And that actually was exciting to know that we're in an area where we're still learning about the brain and learning about learning. And if there's anybody who has expertise related to music, I'd be happy to have you share that as well. Yeah. Well, for mindfulness and things like that, definitely. Yeah.
I do not have expertise in music, but thank you for your wonderful presentation. I always enjoy listening to you, Kristen. I wanted to, I don't understand how you define grit, and how do you measure it in your students?
So grit, we actually used the survey questions from University of Pennsylvania. So Angela Duckworth has come out with an assessment. So we wrote and got permission to use the questions that they have. So I am happy to send you that online. And in fact, we did a presentation. Dr. Penny Hamrick, who is our interim dean at the School of Ed, Dr. Tony Sondergeld and I presented at the assessment conference. We actually have the entire survey, if you'd like. I can send it to you. We shared it with everybody there, and we've asked for additional information to add. We had people in the audience who talked about adding entitlement as a section we should consider that I had not thought about. So I'm happy to share that with you, and it has all of the links.
And she just published a book this year.
Angela Duck, yeah, there's another book. She's another fabulous researcher.
Questions online?
Yeah, if there are any questions online,
Okay,
please.
anybody online questions?
Well, one question was, can they get this live?
Yeah, oh, definitely. Not only will you get the slides, you have all the links, you've got homework, and if you'd like to stay in touch with me and let me know how you've transferred, I wanted to even add more, but I had to keep in mind, they said 1 hour. So, yeah, and I'd be happy to talk with anybody about this. I mean, there's so many exciting areas that you could just disaggregate from this alone and come up with presentations. And I'm hoping at Drexel we'll have far more presentations related to mind-brain education because of the unique expertise that we have at the university.
So we will make the slides available on the Inspire website as well as a link to this entire presentation. Other questions? Another question from online. Can Angela Duckworth's book be posted in the supplemental documentation? Can you post her book in the supplemental
Sure,
documentation?
yes, I'd be happy to. I'd be happy to, not a problem. And I think there was a question in the back as well,
Okay,
yeah.
we'll go here in a minute.
Just a quick request. I would love to have a follow-up session as we do the homework to keep us accountable to do the homework, and I'll commit to come back at some point. Is that possible?
That would be great. In fact, I did a session not too long ago on feedback. And when you look at feedback in the brain, it's so exciting. So looking at assessment and feedback and bringing together other experts across the campus that are within neuroscience, psychology, and education. So I'm happy to be a part of any additional training in this area.
Maybe we can do a Zoom session with you.
It would be wonderful. Yeah.
We have done several discussions in the past. Did you find any ways in your assessment, especially in the courses, in the edu courses, about how to capture tacit knowledge or identification of exceptions? I have done some work in critical environments like flights, like nuclear reactors, and several things that you are developing have a clear intersection. What's your opinion about things like identifying exceptions?
Well, you know, what I'd like to do is get your card. Because honestly, my research is continuing to evolve. We talked about a living definition. I would love to talk to you about how we can look at measuring this. I will say, for me, it has been such a wonderful learning experience. I can't imagine how much has changed inside my brain in the last year. Working with Tricia Vokas and Kurtulus Izitoglou, just because they measure transfer so differently. They're working with surgeons where the transfer is literally down to how you hold your hand and how you make each movement. So it is very different when you're in an area like education. So I'd love to talk with you about how to expand the research that we're involved in.
Question?
Hi, I really enjoyed your talk. I thought it was fantastic.
Thank
so, one thing though I noticed, like in this room, it seems like we're all, pretty interested in this kind of transformative educational structure. How do you think, maybe this is beyond the scope, how do you think we can incorporate this beyond just simply those of us who are already believers, let's put it that way. We're all believers in this room. You're preaching to the choir in a way.
Yeah.
How do we expand it beyond to help those that weren't here unlearn what they have learned?
Yeah.
That seems to be like, I've just started here, and that's part of my role at the College of Engineering, and I was just wondering on your opinion upon this.
Okay, so I will say I'm going to pull out my accreditation hat. So I work as a peer evaluator with middle states. One of the beautiful things about online, and I think this is where this issue came up with Harvard when she kept saying, why online? Well, in online education, because of the federal regulations, the wonderful thing is they have clearly spelled out requirements for training. So they say faculty who are hired not only are qualified, but they have regular training in this area. So for me, it was easy. When I worked at Armstrong State University and we had our 10-year SACS review, I just said to faculty, if you look here, it says faculty are responsible for the quality and rigor of their courses. That took me out of it. It made training so much easier, but I couldn't get to the on-campus faculty. So there was a difference. Now, what's happened with middle states, and I'm sure you may not have noticed, I didn't even notice, they sent out an email. There used to be a distance education handbook or guidelines for how to align your programs with these regulations that went across all accrediting agencies. They've changed it. They've gotten rid of that, and they moved everything within their standards. And for me, this is that paradigm shift. When I pulled up the slide and said we need to change our own mindset, this functional fixedness from online learning to learning online, that's exactly what they've done. They're saying no longer is it simply the online that are going to have to be responsible. So I think the shift needs to occur within the institution. At Drexel, Erin Horvath is leading the initiative for a new center for teaching and learning, and it'll be interesting. She's working with Steve DiPietro and others. We need to be active participants. I believe it starts with onboarding. When you get hired at many of the institutions I've worked with, we've made it a requirement. You will participate in training so you understand what is required, and then there's ongoing training. There's nothing right now, but hopefully through sessions like this, you'll be able to share materials and more people will come. But outside of requiring, it is hard.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
So the spatial relations task
Yes.
with the virtual reality, is that something that we can actually access to use, or is that just part of the—
Yeah, so talk to Nick. It is available. I was hoping, he's teaching a class right now. I wanted him to be here so you can actually put it on and see what it's like. It is fabulous. He has it in COMAD. And if you're interested, what I can do is I'll add this to my slides. I'll put him down as a resource as well. I'll put down the different individuals that you can reach at Biomed or Nick. But he does have it available. His students are using it. I know he's very interested in working with College of Nursing. He's already doing some projects. He worked in Hollywood. The stuff he does is amazing, so I encourage you to reach out. Drexel was the first university to require laptops for students. I'd be really excited to see if we were the first institution to require virtual reality headsets. Because the nice thing going back to practice is you can practice anywhere. And when you look at stress and we talk about neurodiversity for students that may have high anxiety, for students that may have disabilities, it may be difficult to practice in a classroom. If you're in a small group and somebody's like, come on, Susan, hurry up, we've got 5 minutes left. I'm not sure I would be able to do that task. But if you're able to go back and really focus on axons and myelinization at your own, dorm room or at home through practice, when you come back to the classroom, you'll have rehearsed it enough that it's there. So I encourage you, go over. He has amazing things. This is just one small snippet.
One more?
One more. Last question.
So on the virtual reality, I don't know if they ever narrowed down dyslexics. So I think dyslexics are very good at spatial things, like they could be great at 3D, but not at 2D. And so I've heard that MIT is a capital of dyslexic children. So again, going back to access, there could be non-white children who have dyslexia who get cut out of engineering, but there's plenty of white kids who could have dyslexia, dyscalculia, everything, but they still get into engineering.
It's interesting. One of the questions on our evidence-based practices, one of the NeuroMyths questions looks at dyslexia. Is dyslexia reading letters backwards? And I'm not going to give you the response, you have to wait, but we have an expert from American University who is dedicated all of her research. She has a module online for working with dyslexia. So I will put her in contact with you, and she's interested in working with Drexel potentially to develop modules related to the brain and these areas. Yeah.
Oh, one more over here.
Not a question, a request. Can you slide that into your
I will, okay. I'll put all these contacts. Yeah, that's perfect. I will put that in there. Just to know, the file is enormous. So you might want to start downloading before you go to bed. It should be there when you wake up. Yeah.
Just quickly, apropos of the virtual reality and spatial recognition, one of the courses that kids who are majoring in this have to take is introductory drawing. And so there's also the whole conversation between hand-eye coordination and spatial, and whether taking a drawing course, hand drawing course in high school. I mean, that doesn't explain the gender issues, but that would be another dimension of this that would be really interesting to explore.
Well, and it's interesting if you look, who took courses in shop, mechanics, males. So females were told, oh, you're going to do something else. But even that's going away. And so I will say there's been a lot of research about Minecraft. So it has been very positive. So that is it. I want to thank everybody for joining us today on campus. All of you online. I will make sure, I will keep adding to the slides. So it'll probably take me another day to get all the resources there. Please share them, reach out to me. I would love to connect with each of you. And again, what an exciting time to be at Drexel University and working with each of you. Thank you so much.
Please thank Kristen again. Kristen, thank you so much. I'm going to give you a small token of our appreciation. Thank you very much. I want to thank all of you who are on Zoom with us today, all of you who are in the room. Please take copies of the schedule for the rest of the year and join us for the town hall meetings, for the next national speaker that we'll have. And again, Dr. Betts, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. Thank you, everyone.
She told me that, she has something to me. I'm pretty good. That you're actually
But, not only for my teaching, but some just problems.
Oh, okay.
So it's personal processing.
Yeah, it really is.
So we have he does, but he doesn't, he doesn't think it's more. Yeah, there's a whole,
Yeah, no,
because he
definitely.
just
So
got,
much material.
then he gets